The plane doors were still open when the shouting started. A man in worn clothes stood by the aisle, calm as a storm before it breaks. Passengers turned, phones raised, eyes wide with judgment. No one knew who he was, just that he didn't look like he belonged in first class. The attendants whispered, one ordering him to step out, another calling for security. Yet the man didn't move. His silence was heavier than the roar of engines outside. Every heartbeat in the cabin seemed to echo in that pause before shame took flight. When the guards arrived, he didn't resist, only looked at them with something deeper than anger. It wasn't defiance. It was disappointment. As they dragged him toward the exit, his gaze swept across the cabin. Every face, every sneer, every pity-filled glance, like he was memorizing the cost of pride. Silence filled the jet after he was gone, but it wasn't peace, it was guilt. The passengers pretended to scroll, pretending not to feel the weight of what they'd witnessed. The crew whispered, resetting trays, straightening blankets, anything to erase the memory. Yet the air carried it still, like smoke that refuses to clear. Maya stood by the galley, her pulse pounding in her throat, wondering if she had just ruined a man's life, or her own. Somewhere above the clouds, pride had won a battle, but something sacred had been lost. The flight resumed, but the air felt poisoned. Ethan smiled mechanically, announcing service as if nothing had happened. Maya's hands shook each time she poured coffee. In her mind, the man's calm expression replayed endlessly. The quiet dignity of someone who could have fought, but didn't. Somewhere deep down, she sensed it. This story wasn't over. As the city lights of New York shimmered far below, Maya sat in the crew seat, lost in thought. Every announcement sounded hollow now. Somewhere, the man they'd thrown out was probably sitting in silence, too, perhaps waiting for justice. Or maybe never coming back. She didn't know his name, but she couldn't forget his eyes. When the plane landed, the crew disembarked quickly, eager to forget. But as Maya walked past the gleaming logo on the terminal wall, Skylux Airways, a chill ran through her. The man they'd humiliated was gone, yet something in her gut whispered, he wasn't just any passenger, and soon the whole world would know. By morning, the video was everywhere. A man in gray dragged from a plane, his calm face turned into a meme of humiliation. The world raged online. Hashtags, outrage, apologies. But none knew who he was. Maya woke to her phone exploding with messages. Her name wasn't in the headlines yet, but her guilt screamed louder than any trending tag. Meanwhile, in a quiet hotel room overlooking the skyline, that same man sat by the window, watching news anchors debate his worth. He could have spoken up, revealed his name, ended it all, but he didn't. He watched the chaos unfold like a mirror, showing him what his company had become. Loud, hollow, and heartless. At Skylux headquarters, the boardroom was a battlefield of panic. Executives barked orders, PR managers scrambled, and somewhere in the chaos, a single truth lay buried. No one had asked why this had happened. They only cared about the noise, not the wound. Phones buzzed, reputations trembled, and still, no one knew that the man on every screen owned the walls around them. Adrian's silence was his weapon now, letting them expose who they had become without him saying a word. Maya scrolled through the comments, her heart sinking with each cruel word. Strangers debated who was at fault. Some blamed the entitled passenger, others the heartless crew. None knew she was there, staring at the truth behind their rage. She remembered his eyes, the calm that shouldn't have existed in humiliation. Deep down, she sensed something familiar in him. Power didn't hide like that without reason. Her trembling fingers hovered over the videos. Pause frame, freezing his face. The world saw a victim. She saw her leader hiding in plain sight. And the was shy. In that same hour, Adrian turned off the news and opened an old leather notebook. It held sketches of aircraft, early designs of dreams that once took flight with hope. He traced his handwriting with his thumb, remembering the promise he'd made to build an airline that treated everyone with dignity. Somewhere, that promise had been lost in gold-plated cabins and fake smiles. But he wasn't angry anymore. He was determined. Sometimes, to rebuild something pure, you had to let it break first. By nightfall, Skylux Airways issued a formal statement. "We regret the incident." 2 sentences polished and hollow. The internet mocked it instantly. Maya watched from her phone, shame tightening her chest. Somewhere across town, Adrian smiled faintly. The company had spoken, but not from the heart. Tomorrow he would return, not as a ghost in gray, but as the man who built the empire that I had forgotten belonged to him. The next morning, the boardroom waited in tense silence. No one knew who had called the meeting, only that the message came from an internal address no one recognized. Suits whispered, coffee cups trembled. Then, the glass doors opened. The man they had dragged from the plane walked in, wearing the same gray sweater, his calm cutting through the air sharper than any accusation. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Every executive in the room knew in that instant what their polished statements had failed to hide. The man they'd humiliated owned everything around them. No one dared speak first. Adrian's gaze moved slowly from face to face. Each one once full of confidence, now stripped bare. He didn't shout. He didn't demand apologies. Instead, he asked a single question. When did we forget who we serve? The silence that followed was suffocating. Some lowered their eyes. Others searched for excuses in their trembling notes. But there was no excuse big enough to fill the space between arrogance and humanity. Later, Ethan found himself alone in the hallway, his reflection trembling in the mirrored wall. For the first time, he saw himself not as the perfect employee, but as part of something broken. He remembered the man's eyes, the quiet power behind them, and the shame burned deeper. Pride had been his armor, but now it felt like chains. He didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but he knew he wanted to earn it. Meanwhile, Adrian sat alone in his office, the city stretching endlessly beneath him. The world saw him as powerful, but right now, he felt only responsible. He remembered the early days, building planes, training crews, serving passengers with pride. Somewhere along the way, compassion had become a slogan instead of a practice. But he wasn't done. The humiliation had broken something, but also revealed what needed to be rebuilt. He picked up the phone and called the one person who'd understand, his wife. By evening, word had spread. He was back. The staff whispered his name like a legend returned. Maya, summoned for an internal hearing, arrived trembling. She didn't know if she would be fired or forgiven. When the door opened, she saw him sitting at the far end of the table. No guards, no lawyers, just him. He smiled faintly, not in superiority, but in understanding. For the first time since that flight, Maya breathed freely. Truth had a face now, and it wasn't cruel. The investigation began quietly, behind closed doors. Adrian didn't want a spectacle. He wanted the truth. Every department head was called in, not for punishment, but for understanding. Fear filled the halls of Skylux. Maya waited her turn, clutching her hands tight, her breath shallow. Inside, Adrian listened to every story, every excuse, every regret. He wasn't looking for villains. He was looking for the moment they'd all lost their way. The silence after each testimony felt heavier than guilt itself. When Maya's turn came, she stepped inside the room like someone walking through fog. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Not about excuses, but about fear. How pressure had replaced empathy. How rules had drowned out reason. Adrian listened, eyes steady, hands folded. When she finished, the silence that followed wasn't judgment, it was sorrow. For the first time, she realized this wasn't about her mistake. It was about a culture built to forget kindness. It was about a culture built to forget kind. After she left, Adrian remained seated, staring at the empty chair. He saw not an employee, but a mirror. Every mistake she confessed had been born from a system he created. Success had blinded him. Comfort had dulled his vision, and pride had let arrogance slip through the cracks. The world had punished him publicly, but the real punishment was this realization that the empire he built had lost its soul long before that flight. That night, Adrian returned to his office and pulled out every file. Old policies, staff reports, training manuals. Hours passed as he read through years of ambition turned arrogance. He circled phrases that sounded good but meant nothing. Somewhere in the paperwork, he found a company slogan he'd written long ago: "Every passenger is a promise." He smiled sadly. Somewhere that promise had been traded for profit. Not anymore. By dawn, the building was silent. Adrian stood before the window, watching the first light rise over the skyline. The storm inside him had settled. Tomorrow, he would speak. Not just to apologize, but to rebuild. Every downfall, he realized, carries within it the blueprint for redemption. And sometimes, being broken in public is the only way to rebuild in truth. The press conference was scheduled for noon, but by morning, the world was already watching. Cameras gathered like vultures outside the Skylux headquarters, waiting for the story's next twist. Inside, Adrian prepared alone, writing his own speech by hand. The PR team had offered polished statements and legal safe words, but he refused them all. This wasn't about saving a brand. It was about saving truth. He knew that once he spoke, there'd be no going back. But sometimes, the only way to clean a wound is to open it wide and let the light in. When he walked on stage, the cameras fell silent. No teleprompter, no rehearsed smile, just him. He began softly, his voice steady but raw. He didn't speak as a CEO or a businessman. He spoke as a man who had failed his own promise. What happened wasn't a mistake, he said. It was a reflection. Every word carried the weight of someone who had seen the cost of pride up close. And for once, the world didn't interrupt. They listened. Outside the building, people watched from phone screens and billboards. Maya stood in the crowd, still in her uniform, tears slipping down her cheeks as his voice echoed through speakers. He didn't blame anyone. He didn't name names. Instead, he took responsibility for everything. The culture, the arrogance, the blindness. We built walls, he said softly, when we should have built bridges. And in that moment, the world stopped arguing. They just felt. When it was over, he didn't take questions. He simply folded his notes, stepped away from the podium, and left through the back exit into the sunlight. Cameras flashed wildly, but he didn't hide his face. The same man the world mocked for being thrown out now walked freely, unchained by the need to explain himself. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive in applause. It arrives in the quiet knowing that you faced the truth and didn't flinch. That evening, Maya sat in her apartment watching the replay. She replayed his words over and over, letting them sink in. Every passenger is a promise. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a vow renewed. Somewhere deep inside, hope began to return. Maybe forgiveness wasn't given. Maybe it was earned, piece by piece, through action. Outside her window, a plane rose into the night sky, its lights blinking steady, like a heartbeat finding rhythm again. Weeks passed. The noise faded, but the change began to hum quietly through Skylux. New policies, new training, new tone. Planes still flew, but now they carried something invisible. Maya was among the first crew to retrain under Adrian's personal supervision. She expected sternness, but found compassion instead. He didn't talk about perfection, he talked about purpose. Every person who walks through that door, he told them, is carrying a story we can't see. His words settled in her heart like an anchor. During break, Maya approached him quietly. She thanked him, not for forgiveness, but for a second chance. He smiled, telling her that forgiveness wasn't his to give. "You earned it," he said simply. For the first time since that flight, she felt light. The shadow of that day no longer followed her. It had turned into a lesson written in empathy, not shame. Later that week, Adrian boarded another Skylux flight. This time, under his real name. The cabin crew didn't rush him, didn't judge. They greeted him like they would anyone else, with genuine warmth. He took his seat quietly, looking around with a faint smile. Every gesture he saw, the patience, the care, felt like poetry in motion. The airline had changed, not because of policies, but because of people remembering what it meant to serve. As the plane climbed through soft clouds, Adrian looked out at the horizon. The same sky that once witnessed his humiliation now held his redemption. He realized something profound. Hope doesn't come from victory, but from vulnerability. You only find strength after you've been broken. And sometimes falling from the sky is the only way to learn how to truly fly. As the flight reached cruising altitude, Maya passed by his seat once more. Their eyes met for a brief second. No words, no titles, just mutual understanding. Somewhere between sky and earth, forgiveness had already landed. The intercom chimed softly. The captain's voice spoke of clear skies ahead. For the first time in a long while, Adrian leaned back, closed his eyes, and smiled. Months later, the scandal had become legend, but the lesson endured. Skylux had transformed, not through money or slogans, but through humility. Passengers spoke of warmth returning to the skies. The world had moved on, yet Adrian never sought to restore his image. He cared only for the quiet satisfaction of knowing the company finally lived by the values he'd once dreamed of. Redemption doesn't trend. It endures. He made one last visit to the hangar where it all began. The smell of oil and steel filled the air, mingling with nostalgia. The first aircraft he ever designed still stood there, its paint faded but spirit unbroken. Adrian ran his hand across its cold surface and smiled. Success had once meant expansion. Now it meant restoration. Of people, of purpose, of self. Elena joined him, their hands brushing as they stood before the plane that built their life. "You did what few men dare," she whispered. "You let the world see you break." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's the only way to remind them we're human." They stood in silence, two souls bound by years of dreams, mistakes, and redemption. Outside, another jet took off, roaring into the sky. A sound not of pride, but of promise. Later that week, Adrian addressed his employees for the last time. Thousands filled the hangar, faces lifted toward the man who had once fallen. His words were simple, no grandeur, no perfection. "We all stumble," he said, "but what defines us is how we rise, and who we help up when we do." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was heartfelt, and in that quiet thunder, hope found wings again. As night fell, Adrian stepped outside alone. Planes glided above, their blinking lights tracing silent constellations across the dark. He looked up and smiled, knowing that every flight now carried something money couldn't buy: art. The sky, once a place of humiliation, had become his redemption song. Hope, he realized, doesn't live in altitude, it lives in attitude. And sometimes, the hardest landings make the smoothest takeoffs.